A black nurse was thrown out of the hospital in front of the entire department, simply because of the color of her skin. Years later, when she became the head of that very department, fate once again brought in the same police officer who had humiliated her and shattered her faith in justice. Now, his life was in her hands, and his apologies came far too late. How she responded would surprise even the most seasoned among us. But let's start from the very beginning. Rachel Thompson is an experienced black nurse who has spent many years working in the emergency department of a city hospital. It's her night shift, and the department is, as always, overwhelmed. Doctors and nurses are working at their limit, helping everyone who comes in. Suddenly, a police car with flashing lights pulls up to the ER entrance. Several officers, including Sergeant Michael Stanton, are brought in with bruises and cuts after an altercation with a suspect. Stanton, a white man known among his colleagues for his harsh and biased attitude, especially toward people of other races, looks around the department with a displeased expression. His gaze stops on Rachel, who immediately approaches him to provide assistance. As soon as Stanton sees her, he pushes her hand away and sharply says, "Get away from me. I'm not letting someone like you treat me." Rachel is momentarily at a loss for words, but she tries to maintain her professionalism. Calmly, she explains that it is her responsibility to treat his wound to prevent infection. However, Stanton continues to rudely interrupt her, raising his voice so that everyone around can hear. "I need someone competent, not some..." Rachel, tense but composed, barely holds back her emotions but continues standing before him with a straight back, holding her ground. She says, "My job is to help anyone in need, regardless of how they feel about me." Irritated by her firmness, Stanton calls hospital security and demands that Rachel be removed from the department. The head of security, reluctant to create a conflict with the police, reluctantly leads her aside as her colleagues watch the scene in disbelief. Rachel walks out of the department, unable to believe that she, a qualified professional, has been humiliated and dismissed for such an unjust reason. Her pride and self-esteem are shattered, but at the same time, she begins to realize this isn't just an isolated incident. It is a manifestation of systemic discrimination that she must confront. After the humiliating incident, Rachel feels bitter and disappointed. Her colleagues, seeing the unfair way she was treated, try to support her. Dr. Anderson, with whom she has worked for many years, invites her into his office and says he can't believe how far Sergeant Stanton went in his hostility. He advises Rachel to file a complaint with the hospital administration, but she's unsure that her complaint will change anything. Nonetheless, Rachel decides not to stay silent. Summoning her courage, she submits an official complaint to the hospital administration. The next day, she meets with the hospital director, Mr. Carlisle, who listens to her, then simply nods and dryly promises to look into it, making no effort to engage in the topic further. His lack of interest worries her, and she senses that the hospital leadership has no intention of taking real action. Carlisle merely asks her to understand the situation and reminds her of the importance of friendly relations with the police. This conversation convinces her that the hospital would rather sweep the conflict under the rug to avoid complications. Disheartened, Rachel starts sharing her story with close friends and family. Her younger sister, Lisa, records a video of Rachel recounting what happened. She suggests posting it on social media to attract public attention, but Rachel fears this might lead to even more trouble. She doubts whether she's ready to take on the system and risk her career. However, her friends convince her that staying silent only empowers those who think they can treat people this way. After much consideration, Rachel decides to go ahead. She allows her sister to post the video. The post goes viral almost immediately. In the comments, people express outrage over what happened and demand justice. Rachel's story reaches local news, and several activists begin a campaign calling for the hospital to be held accountable. The support from strangers and their anger over her mistreatment inspire her. Now, She is not just a victim, but a symbol of the fight for respect and justice for everyone who has faced similar prejudice. Rachel's story continues to gain traction, and under public pressure, the hospital launches an internal investigation into the incident. The administration can no longer ignore the situation. Every day, activists, patients, and colleagues gather outside the building, demanding justice for Rachel and an official apology from the leadership. Several news channels even interview her, giving Rachel a platform to share her thoughts on discrimination in healthcare and the importance of respect for every medical staff member. In response to the public outcry, the State Department of Health also takes notice of the incident. They initiate an investigation into the entire hospital, looking for any cases of racial discrimination and bias against both employees and patients. The investigation reveals numerous violations, and the hospital finds itself at the center of a scandal, risking its reputation and the trust of its patients. Mr. Carlisle, the hospital director, is forced to reconsider his priorities, realizing that ignoring this issue could come at a high cost to the institution. A few weeks later, Rachel receives an unexpected offer. The State Department of Health proposes that she take on the role of head of the emergency department. Rachel is overwhelmed. It's a tremendous responsibility, but it's also an opportunity to make real changes and protect her colleagues. Her friends and family encourage her to accept, reminding her that she now has the chance to fight for justice, not only for herself, but also for others. Accepting the offer, Rachel becomes the head of the very department where she had worked for many years. Her first actions are to implement a zero-tolerance policy toward discrimination, to train staff on cultural and racial sensitivity, and to establish anonymous reporting channels for violations. She realizes that this alone isn't enough, so she initiates a support and mentorship program for new employees, especially those from minority backgrounds, ensuring that everyone feels safe and valued. Several months after Rachel takes charge, her work and the policy changes in the hospital are already showing results. The hospital's reputation begins to recover, and even those who were initially skeptical about the new policies acknowledge the positive changes. One evening, a patient arrives in critical condition. It's Sergeant Michael Stanton, the same officer who once humiliated Rachel and forced her out of the ER. Now he lies on a gurney, suffering from complications after an injury. And weakened, he has no choice but to rely on those he once scorned. When Stanton realizes that Rachel is now the head of the department, his eyes widen in shock. He understands that his treatment is entirely in her hands and in the hands of her team, and he avoids meeting her gaze. Rachel notices his discomfort, but her face remains calm and professional. She knows she has an opportunity for revenge, but she chooses a different path. Rachel personally oversees his treatment, maintaining a composed and focused demeanor, demonstrating the highest level of professionalism. She checks Stanton's condition daily, ensuring his care is flawless, and speaks to him with respect and attentiveness, as though nothing had ever happened. Her team, aware of the history between them, admires her restraint and resilience. One night, as his pain becomes unbearable, Stanton asks Rachel to stay for a moment. Struggling to find the right words, he apologizes for his behavior. He admits he was wrong and thanks her for the care she's given him, despite everything he did. For Rachel, this moment is a confirmation of her triumph. She has managed to overcome her anger and resentment, proving that strength of character and professionalism are stronger than any prejudice. When Stanton is discharged, he leaves the hospital with newfound respect for Rachel and her team, understanding that his perspective has been forever changed. Rachel's story becomes well known within the professional community, and she receives awards for her contributions to inclusive healthcare. Her journey inspires many, and her department becomes a model for fair and equal treatment of every patient and employee, regardless of skin color or background.